ready.
The first house never looked haunted in daylight. It looked tired, like a person who smiled politely through a cold. It had creaky floors, thin walls, and a bedroom that filled with tree shadows in the wind. At 9 years old, the shadows felt like a private show, until one of them stopped moving. It rested in the corner by the toy chest, not swaying with the branches, not thinning when the moon slid behind a cloud. It just stayed, as if obeying a different wind. The next morning, the chest stood open. That didn't make sense. Mom always said to close it or toys would spill and she'd be the one to step on the Lego and curse under her breath. The lid had a weak hinge and a fake brass latch that never held well. Still, it never opened by itself. I closed it. I didn't tell anyone. Weeks later, my sister, 5 years old, with hair in mismatched clips, told Mom she didn't like the man in the closet. She said it so casually, like she was reporting the weather. Mom laughed and said little kids have big imaginations, then knelt to pray with her at bedtime. She didn't open the closet. That night, there was a new sound in my room. A soft, thin drag across the floor, like a fingernail tracing the grain. It crossed slowly toward my bed and stopped right where my feet hung off the mattress. I held the blanket up to my eyes and tried not to breathe loud. When I woke at dawn, 4 clean scratches had appeared in the wood, close together, the edges pale and powdery like a fresh cut. Mom got angry. Said I must have dragged the bed or scraped something sharp. I said I didn't. She said, "Then who did?" The house didn't answer. After that, the nights learned to talk. A whisper like a radio behind a wall came from my closet, just at the edge of words. My sister would wake up crying and point to her corner, saying, "He's there, he's there." I never saw him straight on. Only the feeling that someone was behind the dark, like a person behind a window. In winter, the hall light clicked off by itself. The door creaked. A tall shape leaned into the doorway, only a head and part of a shoulder. I shut my eyes and performed sleep like a school play. When I dared look, the door was closed. The next morning, Mom said she hadn't gotten up. My sister said the man stood by her bed. Mom lit a candle and said prayers in every room, with a soft, frightened determination that made me believe her lips more than her eyes. For a while, things were quiet. Then one empty afternoon, the toy chest slammed shut in my room while I sat on the couch doing homework. No one else was home. When I went to look, the chest was closed, the latch down, and my toys were scattered all over the floor, like someone had sifted through them and left in a hurry. Mom said it was the cat. The cat, fat and lazy, blinked from the radiator like it didn't care if I lived or died. Years later, out of that house and into a different one where the floor stayed polite, I asked Mom if anything had happened to her there. She hesitated. She said sometimes she woke up and saw a shadow in her doorway. She didn't tell us because she didn't want to scare us. She believed it was a man, maybe one who lived there before. She never said his name. Houses don't come with names, only keys. It should have all ended with moving boxes and a new school, but certain sounds follow like old habits. Sometimes late at night, the radio whisper returns from nowhere, and the dry drag crosses the floor to the place where feet dangle. I tuck mine up, just in case the manners of the dark never changed. Memory keeps a toy chest in the corner, whether there's furniture or not. Memory keeps a closet door that will not latch all the way, and the certainty that something waits for the exact breath where a child gives up and looks. Maybe it was imagination, maybe it wasn't. The cold that came when the shadow didn't move didn't feel like air. It felt like attention, and attention is the only thing the dark has to feed itself. One night, grown and alone in an apartment that made normal sounds, pipes, neighbors, street tires on wet pavement, I woke to the old rhythm. Drag, pause, drag, pause. I didn't have a toy chest anymore. I did have a closet. The door was almost closed. Not quite. I thought about getting up to push it flush, to prove once and for all that the noises were in my head. I didn't. The dark waited, politely. In the morning, 4 pale scratches marked the floor by where my feet had hung in sleep. The wood here is newer, and the marks were faint, as if whatever followed me learned to be careful. The latch on the closet is fine. It opens itself whenever it wants to be counted. The second house pretended to be safe. New siding, trimmed hedges, windows that sealed with a nice sensible click. The street was quiet and backed by trees that met overhead like a green vault, and on the first night, the air smelled like rain even though the sky was empty. The bedroom windows faced the yard. The closet was deeper than any closet needed to be. The tapping began as a question. Light, deliberate, separated by breaths. It would stop when the blanket covered a face. It would start again when the blanket slipped. No branches touched the glass. No insects pattered like that, just a fingertip rhythm, like someone impatient but polite. The night I finally looked, a pale hand was pressed flat against the window. It seemed to glow because the rest of the yard was ink, and it was too high for anyone to reach. Second floor, no ladder, no porch roof. The hand held there a long time. It slid down slowly, leaving nothing behind, and then it was gone. I didn't sleep. Morning came the slow way, through a tight throat and eyes that burned. Telling parents is a skill no one teaches. Mom laughed until she ran out of laughs and switched to explanations about dreams. The new stepdad said it was a raccoon with human hands. He left the hallway light on that night. He didn't mention why. A month later, the 4-year-old brother started mentioning the white lady the way kids mention thunder. Sometimes she sat on his bed, sometimes she stood in the doorway. He cried one night until words broke into chokes. When he could speak, he said her eyes were all black. Therapy came next. Words like sleep paralysis and hypnopompic hallucination. The therapist drew pictures of locked windows. The body can trick itself, she said. The mind can make pictures to explain pressure. Maybe, but locks don't turn themselves. On the worst storm night, the window lock turned with a neat metallic decision. The sash slid up smooth. Cold walked into the room like a guest who never wiped her feet. She came in without stepping, tall enough to bend near the ceiling, dress moving in air that didn't move. Her hair was black and stringy, and wrong in a way that the brain understands before it can describe. Her face was chalk. Her eyes were wells without bottoms. She leaned down and whispered a name in a voice like dry leaves rubbing. The scream arrived later, as if it needed a hallway light to find its way. Parents rushed into a closed, locked window, and a child who frightened them more by the way silence held after the scream than by the noise itself. The storm beat the siding. Water ran in the gutter. Everyone said things that sounded like comfort and felt like pleading. The hallway lights stayed on all night, an amber little sun that pushed back only as far as the threshold. After that, nights became routines. Blanket tense, counting breaths, listening for taps. The closet door never stayed fully shut, but it learned to pretend closing almost enough to look decent, always shy a finger width. The brother stopped talking about the white lady, but changed the way he slept, face to the wall, hand under the pillow, as if making an exchange with the dark. I won't look, and you won't say my name. Storms never became normal. Years later, grown and in another town, thunder still turns the stomach. There is always that small, absurd fear that if the blinds lift, the hand will already be there, palm to glass, waiting to slide down and teach the mouth how to forget its own voice. People love neat explanations. Sleep paralysis, suggestion, anxiety, all of them true, maybe. Truth multiplies in the dark. But locks turning by themselves don't fit into a neat box, and memory does not behave like evidence. On a spring night that smelled like wet soil, a gust popped a picture frame slightly askew. The hallway light was on for no reason. Habit. The window gave a soft tick. A person can choose not to look. The blinds stayed down. Breath counted to 100 and back. Somewhere in the house, a door sighed on its hinge, like a tired ant, telling a story she's told for years. The name that used to be spoken in the dry leaf voice remained unsaid. Silence, it turns out, is also a lock, and some nights it holds. The driveway watcher. When the red bike was new, the bell was the best part. It made a clear silver note that sounded like permission. The street was simple, lined with small houses whose roofs dipped and peaked like careful handwriting. On most afternoons, an old man stood where his long driveway met the sidewalk. He wore a hat and did not cross the line. He waved the kind of wave grown-ups reserve for kids who have been taught rules. He asked about school across the distance. He laughed at small jokes. He noticed the bell. He never stepped onto the sidewalk. It went on like that for weeks, friendly without closeness, and the distance between the driveway seam and the concrete curb became a kind of responsible safety. Here is where neighbors talk. Here is where children stop. He knew little things he shouldn't about a younger brother, a father's new car. It was easy to assume he had seen these things, patient on his porch, a watcher of the street. Then he stopped appearing. Curtains closed. The driveway emptied. A woman watered the backyard garden one day. The rule against crossing the street bent under the new bike's bright pride. At the back gate, the woman said the man sounded like Harold, her husband. Harold had died the year before, in his chair. Inside, she fetched a photograph. Hat, smile, the exact warmth of presence that memory carried. Only one difference, a pale scar from ear to mouth. The man by the driveway had no scar. The bike ride home was quiet, not because there was no traffic, but because the mind turned down its own radio. That night, a voice called the name from near the bedroom window. It was a familiar, friendly shape of sound. Parents performed the ritual. Blinds lifted, yard empty, locks checked, flashlight washing the grass. The explanation was sleep. The throat hurt in the morning anyway. Dares entered the story, as they do. Stand in that driveway at night and say his name. The dare was refused. The street changed over the years. Families moved. Paint colors shifted. The long driveway remained, its slope steady, its meeting seam still exact. The woman's house stood empty for a time, then filled with new people, new cars. Returning as an adult, the corner felt smaller and farther at once. The driveway looked shorter, but also like a distance that had always been measured in something other than feet. The old habit rose. Stop at the corner and glance without meaning to. No one stood at the seam. The air had the attentive quality of a held breath. Memory is a better summoner than courage. The voice came again, pleased, gentle, the laugh riding along the name like a brim rides along a hat. Stepping onto the driveway felt like breaking a rule that had been waiting to be broken. The concrete held the day's heat in a way the sidewalk did not, a quiet difference that made the skin think of footsteps stored like sunlight. There was no figure. Peripheral vision tried to invent one, and failed. A brim hovered at the edge of where faces form. Race you to the corner, the voice said. And the kneecaps remembered the downhill tug that can send a kid flying into the street if the pedals catch wrong. Nothing moved except the trees. The air softened, warmed, cooled again, a slow breath. The answer was not running. The answer was stepping back to the curb, and standing on the safe side of the seam where kids and neighbors used to trade weather. The voice sounded farther after that, not angry, not disappointed, simply obeying a boundary that had been there all along. That night, in a different house with a different window, the same name rose softly from the dark outside and waited. The blinds stayed down. The rule spoke itself, steady as an oath. The driveway is not the sidewalk. The curb is where I stop. Some distances don't shorten with age. They hold, like lines painted on a road, instructing everyone who passes. And if a voice still tries the old game from time to time, it is only because the rules work so well that even the dead learn to follow them.
Anya Rao, a forest rescue volunteer, drives into the reserve as a thunderhead cracks the night in two. The rain is the heavy, curtain kind, dense enough to make the road vanish a few meters ahead. She is answering a distress ping from a lost hiker's GPS beacon. Somewhere beyond the firebreak, where the sal trees cluster too close and the soil turns to black glass underfoot, she kills the headlights to listen. Through the hiss, a child cries out. Then again, closer. She flicks her torch into the trees. The beam is a flat wall of silver needles. No shapes, no movement. Just the sound, thin, breathy, soaked with shiver. "Stay where you are," Anya calls. "I'm coming." Her radio crackles back only with rain. The first footprints appear on the verge. Small, bare, pressed deep, already pooling with water. She follows them, skirting the glistening buttresses of roots, counting steps so she can find her way back. The crying wavers left, then right, then behind her, like it's trying on positions. Anya stops and cups her hands. "Clap if you hear me," she yells. A clap comes back, but it's wrong, thin as wet bark slapped against bark. A branch snaps behind her head. She swings the torch and catches what she thinks is a face. A pale oval between curtains of hair. The beam flares on raindrops, and the face is gone. In the torch's afterimage, she sees a smear on a trunk, a perfect handprint, water dark, dripping upward. She backs toward the firebreak and finds only undergrowth. Her counted steps don't get her anywhere. The crying turns into a perfect imitation of her own voice calling her name. That's when she remembers. This patch of forest is known for the mimic thrushes, birds that can copy tones and timbres. But no bird opens your truck door. Because when she stumbles back to the track at last, her pickup stands open. The inside is soaked, the windshield fogged from breath. In the condensation on the passenger glass, someone has traced, with a wet finger, a simple drawing. 3 nested ovals, like ripples. Anya slides behind the wheel, locks the doors, and starts the engine. The wipers lurch and smear the ripples into nothing. As she pulls away, the radio clicks alive and speaks in her voice. "Don't leave me." The GPS ping begins moving on her map, keeping pace with her truck. She accelerates. It accelerates. The sound in the canopy keeps time with her tires. At the gate, a ranger flags her down. He leans into the rain and shouts over it. "Bad night for a search, huh?" She nods. He squints past her at the passenger seat and steps back like something just dripped on his boot. "You pick someone up?" Anya looks. The seat is soaked. The headrest bears 5 long wet streaks like resting fingers. Nobody reports a missing child. The beacon is later found nailed to a tree 9 meters up. That night, the rain returns, and Anya lies awake as the gutters around her house begin to speak, practicing her name until it sounds exactly like the way she says it.
Story 2. Cabin of the Drip.
Armin and Mira reach the inherited cabin just as the forest closes up with weather. Rain hammers like a crowd on the roof. The place is a one-room remnant of their grandfather's logging. Years' dark beams, a stone hearth, a trapped, tannic smell of old wood soaked and dried 1,000 times. On the table lies a tin pail and a note in their grandfather's hand. When it rains, catch what comes inside, not what comes down. They laugh at it, chalking it up to old man eccentricity. Mira sets the pail by the door anyway. Drip, drip. Not from the ceiling yet, from the far corner where the walls meet. The log ends are blackened there, as if burned. The corner begins to bleed water, a slow tear that smears down the seam. Armin touches it and jerks his hand back. The water is cold as iron and smells like moss and rust. Mira finds a second pail. The drip becomes a run, then a sheet. The corner darkens as if a storm is behind the wall itself. The rain outside dims, but the cabin rain grows. It pools around their boots, turns the floor slick. It's a leak from the roof, Armand says, though it isn't. The roof, in fact, is dry as bone from the rafters inward. The wet is coming from the joints, the dovetails, the places where the cabin is most itself. They search by phone light. Behind the hearth, a trapdoor. Below, not a cellar, just packed earth veined with roots. Beneath the earth, the glint of pooled water. In it, something pale. Mira recoils. The pale thing rises with the water wooden pegs, dozens of them, entombed as if plugging holes in a dam. Each peg is carved with grooves that look like fingerprints. The note makes sense all at once. catch inside, not down. Their grandfather had built this cabin to hold something back during storms. Armand lifts a peg to see what it holds, and the cabin exhales. The wall seems open, and black water pours through with force enough to rock the house. In that water are shapes, as if the rain were remembering, faces pressing against it, mouths open, hair thrashing, eyes closed against silt. Mira screams, but her voice is muffled, underwater in her own head. Armand slams the peg back, and the faces smear away, but one stays, printed in water against the wall, an old man's face that looks like their grandfather. His lips move. They can't hear him. Mira leans close and feels cold breath on her ear from the shape in the wall. "Don't empty us," he says, and she tastes rust. The storm peaks. The cabin sways as if riding a tide. The pegs drum under the floor like 1,000 fingers. Armand and Mira hold the pegs with their bare hands to keep them from lifting. The water tries to lift them too. When dawn comes, the pressure relents. The cabin dries in seconds, as if wicking everything back inside. The pails are full, but what's in them is not water. It is a thick amber, heavy with silt, and in it are curled slivers of wood and a single, perfect fingernail. They leave the pails on the table. On the drive out, the creek is running high and brown. At the bend where the logging road meets the county blacktop, a sign sticks up slick with rain. Memorial, 17 drowned in the flood of '62. Mira counts the pegs in her mind. The number is the same. That night, back in town, rain thrums the apartment windows. Mira gets up to place a bowl under a familiar sound. The ceiling is dry. The drip is inside the wall. Kabir drives the forest highway at 2 a.m., his rideshare app idle, rain skimming across the asphalt with a sound like frying. This stretch is notorious for wrecks when wet, a ribbon of black between miles of pine. The mile markers flash past. 10, 11, 12. He eases up for a curve, and his headlights catch a figure standing where the shoulder collapses into ditch hands, clasped, hair plastered to her face, wearing a reflective triangle vest like a road worker. He pulls over. The woman doesn't look at him. She looks at the mile marker. 13. "You okay?" he asks. She climbs in without a word, water dripping off her onto the rubber mats, eyes fixed forward. "Where to?" He tries again. She lifts a shaking hand and points ahead. As he merges, the hazard triangles appear in his beam. 3 of them, in a pattern in the road, not a line. 2 tight at the bottom, 1 at the top. He swerves around them and glances at the woman. She whispers, "Don't break the shape." He laughs uncertainly and pushes on, eyes trying to pierce the spray. They pass another set of triangles ahead of a flooded dip. The triangles are wrong again, too close, too purposeful. "Road workers would never do that," he says, mostly to himself. The woman's hands are blue around the knuckles. "Do you see the truck?" she whispers. He does not. He does see. In the rear view, the mile marker. It says 13 again. The loop is subtle at first. Landmarks rhyme rather than repeat. A split stump like a twisted hand. A reflector burned out exactly at the apex of the S-curve. The rain thickens until the wipers are metronomes. He checks the time and realizes 10 minutes have stretched into 40. The woman wets her lips. "Don't stop for anyone but me," she says. "Even if they look like me." Lights bloom ahead, hazards low and steady in the wash. A jackknife truck blocks half the lane, naked steel shimmering with rain. A man waves them down, soaked, desperate. Kabir slows by reflex. The woman beside him turns her face toward the windshield for the first time. Her eyes are filmed with water, and inside each pupil is a triangle. "Don't break the shape," she says, "or you'll let it cross." Kabir threads the car through the narrow space. The triangles leave. He feels the pressure of something big and hungry on his right, just outside the glass. The man pounding on his hood moves wrong too jerkily, too light on the road for someone in a storm. Kabir accelerates. The man's face blurs into the rain. They pass, and the loop breaks. The mile marker slams to 14. Kabir exhales so hard he feels lightheaded. He glances at the passenger seat. It is empty. The mats are dry. No imprint on the fabric. At 15, he pulls into a lit truck stop, hands shaking, tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The night clerk looks up when he enters and nods toward a bulletin board layered with flyers. "Another storm night," the clerk says. "Keep your triangles right." Kabir scans the board. Among the lost and memorials is a laminated sheet. At mile 13, set triangles in this formation to keep the lane clear. The diagram is the same as the road. 2 close at the bottom, 1 at the top. In the corner, a photo of a young woman in a triangle vest, killed in a pile-up 2 years prior, name washed unreadable by Sunday. When Kabir returns to his car, the hazard kit in his trunk is open. The 3 triangles are wet, arranged exactly, nested to form a smaller triangle. He drives home with them on the seat beside him. Every time rain hisses across the windshield, he hears a woman exhale from the back seat and feels the car thread between things bigger than it should.
Michael had always enjoyed the solitude of his small apartment in Ohio. Being alone wasn't a problem for him. In fact, he liked it. But that night, the thunderstorm had rolled in fast, and the sky was a tapestry of black clouds pierced by occasional lightning. He was sitting on the couch, headphones on, scrolling through late-night videos, when a sudden knock-knock echoed from the back door. At first, he ignored it. Maybe someone had knocked on the wrong apartment, he thought. But the knocking repeated, louder, deliberate. His heart started racing. Nobody ever used the back door. Slowly, he got up, heart hammering against his ribs, and approached the door. Peering through the rain-streaked glass, he saw a tall figure, standing perfectly still just outside. There was no face, no visible features, only the shadow of a man towering in the storm. "Hello? Who's there?" Michael whispered, his voice trembling. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence, only the wind and distant thunder. Then, a few seconds later, knock-knock again. But this time, it came from upstairs, his bedroom window. The thought of someone climbing to that window made his stomach turn. Michael grabbed a flashlight and crept upstairs. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold it steady. The bedroom window was locked, curtains drawn. He checked the latch secure. Nobody could have been there. And yet, the knocking came again, faint, almost like it was right behind him. He backed into the corner of the room, flashlight trembling, when he noticed wet footprints on the carpet, leading from the window toward the middle of the room. He froze. The sound of heavy breathing filled the air, though he was alone. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered. When it turned back on, the figure was there, standing at the foot of his bed. The shadow didn't move, didn't speak. It just watched. The only thing visible was a faint outline of a smile, twisted and wrong, spreading slowly across a faceless head. Michael stumbled backward, tripping over the bed frame. The flashlight fell, rolling under the bed, casting long, dancing shadows. When he looked up again, the figure had vanished. The only sound was the storm outside and his own ragged breathing. He didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every gust of wind made him jump. And just as the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, he noticed something chilling. Scratches on the bedroom floor, right next to the bed letters etched deep into the wood. They spelled one word: alone. Michael moved out that morning. He never returned. And sometimes, late at night, he still swears he hears knocking, coming from the back door of every empty apartment he passes. Emily had always loved her small Victorian house in a quiet town in England. It was old, creaky, and full of character, exactly what she liked. That weekend, her parents had gone out of town, leaving her completely alone. At first, it was peaceful. She cooked herself a late dinner, watched a few movies, and enjoyed the silence. But by midnight, the quiet had started to feel oppressive, almost alive. It started as a faint tapping, Soft footsteps in the hallway outside her bedroom. Emily froze. Her dog, Winston, was curled up on her bed, snoring lightly. The sound couldn't have been him. She told herself it was just the house settling. Old houses made noises, right? But the tapping continued. Deliberate and rhythmic step, 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 growing louder, closer. With a racing heart, she slowly opened her bedroom door. The hallway was empty. She scanned the dimly lit corridor, shadows stretching along the wallpaper, but no one was there. The footsteps stopped. Emily exhaled, telling herself she was imagining things. She closed the door and tried to sleep. Minutes passed, and just as she was drifting off, the sound returned faster this time, heavier, almost like someone was running down the hall. Emily's pulse quickened. She reached for her phone, only to realize it was dead. Panic set in. She grabbed the small kitchen knife she kept in her drawer and crept toward the door again. Then, from under the crack at the bottom of her bedroom door, a shadow began to appear, stretching and twisting as if reaching into the room. A low, distorted male voice whispered, "Is greater than, why did you lock the door?" Emily stumbled backward, heart hammering, knife trembling in her hand. The shadow didn't move away. It lingered, pulsing like a dark breath under the door. She backed into the corner of her room, pressing herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. Every instinct screamed to run, but the hallway beyond was empty, and she had no way out. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. At some point, the shadow retreated, and the house was silent again. Emily didn't sleep a wink that night. By dawn, she decided she couldn't stay. She called her friend to pick her up, leaving the house as fast as she could. Even after moving out, Emily never forgot the whisper. Sometimes, late at night, she swears she can hear the echo of footsteps behind her, slow, rhythmic, following her wherever she goes. And she'll never again be alone in a quiet hallway, not even for a moment. Daniel had moved into his new apartment in New Jersey only a few weeks ago. It was modern, quiet, and for the first time in years, he was living completely alone. He liked the silence, the freedom. No roommates, no noise, just him and the occasional hum of the city outside. But one night, that silence began to feel wrong. It was a Wednesday. Daniel had settled in for a late-night movie marathon. The apartment was dark, only the light from the television illuminating the room. As he watched the opening credits, he noticed something odd in the reflection of the TV screen. For a split second, he saw the silhouette of a man standing behind the couch. His heart skipped a beat. Daniel spun around the empty room. Nothing. Maybe he had imagined it. Shaking his head, he turned back to the TV. But then it happened again. The figure appeared, closer now, reflected in the glossy black of the screen. This time the man was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wrong, twisted, unnatural. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for the remote, trying to switch off the TV. The reflection didn't disappear. Instead, it seemed to move independently, stepping closer toward him, as if trapped in the screen but somehow aware of him. The air in the apartment grew colder, heavier, like it was pressing down on his chest. He ran to the door, fumbling with the lock. No one was there. But when he returned, desperate to get the TV unplugged, the reflection now appeared directly behind him, though the space was empty. Daniel froze. The man's eyes seemed to pierce through him, empty yet intense, and the smile stretched wider, as if enjoying Daniel's fear. For hours, Daniel sat on the couch, refusing to move, refusing to look anywhere else. Every flicker of the screen made the reflection appear closer, mimicking his every movement. Sleep was impossible. The city's normal hum outside became a distant, menacing backdrop to the silence inside. By morning, Daniel convinced himself it was just his imagination. Exhaustion, stress, the paranoia of living alone for the first time. He left for work, but that night, when he returned, the apartment felt wrong. The air was thick, oppressive. The TV was off, but he could see it, the faint outline of the man's reflection lingering in the dark screen, as if waiting. Days passed, and Daniel tried to ignore it, But the figure always returned, always in the reflection. Mirrors, shiny surfaces, even the black glass of his turned-off appliances everywhere he looked. The man was there, watching. His friends noticed he'd become withdrawn, jittery, paranoid, jumping at shadows. Eventually, Daniel moved out, but he never really escaped. Late at night, even in the new apartment, he swore he could see a figure in the reflection of his phone screen, the same twisted smile. And every time he caught it, he felt the same icy dread, the sense that being alone, in silence, could bring something terrifying into your life, something that wasn't supposed to exist. Some nights he doesn't even turn the lights on. Some nights he leaves the TV on, just to make sure the figure isn't following him. But no matter what he does, the reflection waits, always waiting. The rain started before midnight, the kind that turns the highway into a ribbon of fog and hiss, and leaves the canopy lights over Pump 2 flickering like a dying heartbeat. Mason's shift was always quiet from midnight to 4, a dead zone between long-haul coffee breaks and the first wave of commuters. It was supposed to be boring, the kind of boring that pays the rent and lets a person sleep in daylight without dreams. He liked boring. He hated how the fluorescent bulbs in aisle 3 buzzed when the humidity climbed. He hated how the convex mirror over the snack aisle warped faces into funhouse masks when night drivers wandered in with circles under their eyes. Just before 1, a white panel van rolled up and idled by the dumpsters, where the cameras didn't quite reach. It was normal for trucks to tuck back there to nap, to eat, to wait out weather, but the van never cut its engine. The windows were tinted and the plate was half-masked by mud spatters. Mason watched it through the office window while he counted cigarettes, 2s and 10s, until the rows went neat, and right then the phone rang with a hollow sound that always made him think of an empty room. "Highway Services," the voice said. "Card skimmer checks. New advisory. Got a hit from your zip last week. Keep eyes on Pump 2. Thieves like the outer lane." It sounded official enough. The voice had the clipped cadence of someone who spent years telling strangers what to do. Mason jotted down "skimmer check Pump 2 and hung up, breathing in the smell of burnt coffee that had lived in the metal of the pot since before he'd been hired. At 1:17, the bell over the door chirped. A man in a rain poncho came in without looking up, water streaming off the plastic in little rivers. He kept his hood up and moved fast, a circling scan of the candy racks, then a detour to the bathroom key. "Back in a sec," the man said, not waiting for a reply. The bathroom key was on a plank of wood with "Do Not Copy" burned into it, heavy enough to be a weapon. Mason watched the bathroom door close in the convex mirror and saw only his own face, widened and odd, staring back. Minutes stretched. The van by the dumpsters never moved. The bathroom door opened and closed, with the quiet click of a careful hand, and the key clacked back onto the counter, damp and cold. "Thanks," the man said from inside the poncho, head still down. Then motion, the bell again, the door yawning briefly to the hiss of rain, and he was gone. The floor by the bathroom was wet, with prints shaped like half moons. Mason fetched the yellow mop sign and wiped them away, irritated at the extra task, grateful for something to do. At 1:40, the camera over aisle 3 glitched. It did that on humid nights. A line tore across the screen and rolled itself into snow. Mason tapped the monitor box, and the snow shrank to a jitter in the corner. Just as it settled, something shifted in the ceiling tile above the office door. It was nothing, he told himself, just ductwork reacting to the cold air kicking on. The ceiling was a patchwork of panels that weighed almost nothing and moved if a person coughed too hard. He looked away. The fluorescent bulbs hummed louder. The rain thickened. At 1:53, the chime at Pump 2 dinged twice, as if someone had lifted the nozzle and put it back without paying. The register screen popped a window. Authorization request. The deck was empty when he leaned to see the mystic curtain between the pumps and the road. The phone rang again. Same hollow, same voice. "Seeing any anomalies at Pump 2? Someone lifted and replaced the handle," Mason said, hating how his voice felt too loud in the cube of the office. "No sale. Copy," the voice said, not really listening. "You got a hatch above the office?" Mason's eyes flicked up before he could stop them. "Yeah, maintenance crawl. Lock the bathroom door," the voice said. Make sure it's deadbolted, then step outside, count to 30, and come back in. Just checking if the lock sensors report. The request was dull enough to be real. He pocketed the bathroom key plank, turned the bolt, and stepped outside into the hiss and pulse of the canopy lights. The night pressed on his ears. He counted raindrips on the curb. He realized halfway through counting that he'd left the door to the store propped with a kick wedge, the wedge that kept him from getting locked out. From the street, the lit rectangle of the counter looked like a stage set. Inside, the office door was just visible, the rectangle under the hatch. The ceiling tile moved. It didn't lift. It flexed, as if someone pressed a palm against it from above and let go. The wedge bucked. The main door drifted on its spring, and the alarm in Mason's chest, old animal, rising like heat, went finally fully on. He let the door shut. He didn't go inside. He didn't pretend to fix a sensor. He stood with his back to the window, rain filling the hood of his jacket, and dialed 911 with fingers that didn't feel like his. "Take your time," the operator said. "Tell me exactly what's happening." He told it like inventory, stripped of feeling, like counting 2s and 10s. White van, poncho man, bathroom, the hatch, the pump ding, the voice that told him to go outside. The operator asked if anyone else was in the store. He said no. She asked if there was a safe room. He said the walk-in cooler had an inside latch. She told him to go around to the back, stay low along the building's wall to avoid the front windows, and slip in through the stockroom door if it was unlocked. It was. He moved slow. The stockroom was cold and smelled like motor oil and old cardboard. From there, a person could see the office through the wire window in the door. Mason crouched and peered. A ceiling tile hung at an angle. Fingers, pale and wet, curled over the edge, and then a face appeared upside down, hovering, turning slowly like a lantern on a rope. It wasn't the face of a monster. It was a man in his 30s with damp hair, a cheap headlamp, and a jaw clenched tight around a screwdriver. He listened to the store in a way that made Mason think of animals at the tree line. Then he slid back up, cat quiet, and the tile went flat. The hallway to the cooler felt a mile long. Mason moved like a shadow, slow, deliberate, forcing his breath to stay in. Inside the cooler, the world became metal and white light, and the dusty smell of unwashed soda bottles. The latch slid into place with a sound that was louder than thunder. He crouched between crates of water and a stack of expired cupcakes and held the phone like a relic. The operator told him officers were 3 minutes out. 3 minutes was forever. 3 minutes was maybe enough time to unscrew the grate over the cooler's ceiling vent. Something knocked the office chair over. The office door opened. Boots whispered on tile. A person could learn the geography of a place by sound. The rubber mat by the fountain drinks, the grit by the door, the hollow slap in the aisle where the tile had a crack. The footsteps paused by the bathroom. The knob clicked. The bolt held. The footsteps came toward the cooler hallway and stopped. There was a listening silence. Then, metal scraped. Something slid across the handle outside the cooler door. A squeegee pole, maybe. Wedged through the grip to jam it closed. The headlamp beam flashed through the cooler window for a split second, a dull oval of light that found nothing interesting and moved on. The beam hung longer on the office door, on the register, on the monitors. The hallway swallowed the footsteps again. The building hummed like a living thing. Somewhere far away, sirens braided with rain. Later, after the sheriffs had pulled the ceiling down and dragged a man from the crawlspace with his jacket torn and his face red with thermal dust, after they'd found the screwdriver marks around the hatch. The coiled rope, the snack wrappers pressed flat into insulation, the statements and clipboard questions began. The man had come in at 11:52, wearing the poncho. He had taken the bathroom key and opened the drop ceiling above the toilet, climbed up, and snaked through the space to the office hatch. He had watched while Mason counted cigarettes and wiped away his own footprints. The van was stolen. The phone call had been a spoof. Could have gone another way, the deputy said at dawn, hands on hips, looking up into the ripped open ceiling. Sometimes they wait hours. The ceiling was a mouth without teeth. The store felt new, and wrong with its innards exposed. Every night after, long after the holes were patched, and the hatch was fitted with a lock that needed 2 hands and a code, Mason would hear the lightest touch overhead whenever the air kicked on. He'd tilt his head and listen, and the building would listen back. And from then on, he liked boring less. He liked bolts and latches and lists more. He learned the weight of every tile by heart.
This story takes place near a remote cabin at the edge of the Black Pine Forest.
The cabin at Black Pine wasn't remote in the way maps suggest. Just 3 miles off the county road down a washboard track that ate tires and hid service bars. But it felt like the world thinned out there, until only timber and weather were left to talk back. Arya took it because the rate was cheap and the week was quiet, a gap between edits where recording clean forest beds would pad the sound library she'd been building for years. A ranger neighbor had said the place used to be a research outpost before funding dried up, which explained the metal conduit along the rafters and the rusted brackets where monitoring gear had hung. By dusk on day 2, she'd set 4 passive mics outside and a tripwire of bottle caps on fishing line across the back steps. More for her nerves than for any real security, the generator coughed once after dark and settled into its temperamental purr, the sound becoming a blanket against the bigger quiet that lived in the trees. Rain came in a patient, soaking fall, moving in sheets that turned the yard into a gray mouth, and the only light beyond the windows was the red blink of a trail cam aimed down the access path. Arya made notes with the meticulousness that paid her rent. Mic positions, humidity, wind direction, timestamps, battery rotations, a little grid of order taped to the fridge, beside the evacuation plan and the ranger's emergency number. The phone had signal if she stood by the sink and leaned her shoulder into the window frame. She sent a pin to a friend's and promised to call at noon if weather allowed. The first knock came at 1:11 a.m. 2 gentle taps on the kitchen window, like a polite guest, had found their way to the wrong door and didn't want to wake the house. She froze with the mug halfway up. The clink of ceramic on tooth, loud enough to feel reckless. For a second she thought it was the generator coughing again in some new register. Then the trail cam blinked once, twice, and went dark. Not like it fired a shot, but like someone's shadow had eaten the little cone of infrared. Arya set the mug down and killed the inside lights, standing until the cabin's reflections drained from the glass, and the outside could look in. She told herself wind does things and called up the trail cam phone app, waiting on the lazy handshakes of weak radio to bring thumbnails into being. The last frame before the blink was empty path and rain. As ordinary as anything, the next frame never arrived. She flipped the deadbolt on the kitchen door and checked the back, running fingers along the bottle cap line, finding the tension the way a guitarist tests a string. Her breath fogged the glass, and in it she wrote reflexively an X with her fingertip, then wiped it away with the back of her sleeve, as if an X could be read by something that waited. At 1:24 a.m., her phone chimed a Bluetooth pairing request from a device named Brick, a cheap speaker's default name she'd seen 100 times in urban coffee shops, but never 3 miles down a logging road. The request fired again when she rejected it, stubborn as a child, then stopped, leaving only the generator purr in the wet hush of the yard. Arya killed the generator, and the silence came down like a lid, her ears filling with cabin sounds. She'd already cataloged the tick of cooling metal, the sigh of the chimney, the soft click that came every 6 minutes from the old thermostat. In that new, heavy quiet, she heard footsteps on wet wood, a slow, careful wait on the back steps where the bottle cap should sing. They didn't sing. She put her palm to the wall as if the cabin could tell her what it knew, and felt the faintest thread of vibration at each careful step. Her hand slid down to the latch and held there, the metal greasy with years, and she pictured the back door from the outside peeling paint, soft wood, a lock plate held by screws that had bit and rebit into the same holes forever. A face appeared in the reflection she had just wiped. Not a face really, but the suggestion of one. The way 2 raindrops can make eyes if a person needs them to. And she backed away until the table edge found her hip. The knock came again, not at the kitchen, but at the bedroom window across the cabin. Same polite rhythm, knuckle light, as if someone tried to be heard by the person inside, without waking whatever else might be listening outside. Arya's mind did inventory, uselessly efficient. There is 1 road in, 1 road out, and a single porch light that now throws no light because it is unplugged from the generator. There are 4 mics out there with LED tells that could be seen if a person stood 6 feet away and waited for the next blink cycle. And there is a trail cam that has gone from operator to subject. There's a Bluetooth speaker named like a brick that wants to pair, which means it's close enough to talk to a phone that can barely call town from the sink. A voice came through the wall then, a whisper-soft playback of her own field notes from earlier, the phrasing exact, and the ambient hiss of the yard wrapped around it like gauze. Mike B, southwest corner by the stump, windshield adjusted 15 feet from path. The words were wrong by being perfectly hers, according to the little backup chain she kept running habitually, now cut and looped by hands that knew how to make sound into a key. The clip played twice and stopped, and a third knock at the bedroom window replaced it. The rhythm slower now, patient in a way that made patience a blade. Arya slid the heavy dresser against the bedroom door and dragged the mattress to angle the line of sight the way instructors told people to do in classes she'd taken because it felt like control. Her satellite messenger lived in her camera bag. She thumbed it awake and watched the little screen argue with low clouds. The progress bar inching a breadcrumb of hope toward whichever tower or bird still cared. She typed, "Someone outside cabin, mimicking my voice. Trail cam down. No car visible from window." Then added the coordinates printed on the ranger's emergency card because she knew better than to trust pins and rain. The bar finished and the messenger chirped, and she allowed herself one lungful that felt less like drowning. Outside, the speaker named Brick tried to pair again and then acquiesced, withdrawing into the yard where all devices eventually sleep. 20 minutes is elastic in fear, but she counted it anyway, watching the numbers on the stove clock swell and roll, and wondering if the power reserve in its mind would die at an inopportune now. The bottle caps finally rang, not because someone stepped on them, but because a raccoon or a boot or a branch snagged the line and made music by accident. A bright tin alarm that revealed a thing trying not to reveal itself. A shape moved between trunks, black on blacker, geometry where there shouldn't be any, and she snapped one flash photo through the gap in the dresser, the white burn of it painting after images on her sight. When her eyes came back, the yard was only rain. By the time tires sounded on the access path, slow in respect, lights off in the last 20 yards as if the forest were a church, Arya had stacked her life by the door in neat piles that fit in 2 trips and told herself not to think of the third thing that always gets left. 2 deputies and the ranger neighbor came in quietly, doing that professional glance at corners and hands that said they had learned to see without staring. And the first thing one of them did was touch the bottle cap line and nod to the others like Arya had passed some unspoken test. They found the speaker under the crawl of the porch, rain-beaten and cheap, wired to a tiny power bank taped in a baggie. They found her spare audio recorder in the pine duff 20 feet off the steps where someone had gone flat to avoid the trail cam that still blinked and recorded nothing. They found prints that were neither barefoot nor Jiso. Boot-socked, the ranger said, because socks leave a suggestion more than a shape, and the suggestion walked a slow arc around the cabin and back to the logging road where tread marks waited. Morning showed the trail cam's last real frame, a shoulder of a jacket at the edge of the cone, and the exact pattern of ripstop she had glimpsed, reflected when she turned her kitchen into a mirror for fear. The ranger said sometimes people learn a place the way a deer learns a fence line, by testing it every season until the gap stops shocking. Sometimes those people buy speakers and wait for rain and make patience a blade. No one promised a name or a face, only that a patrol would swing the road more often, that motion lights would be better than mirrors, that the cabin's soft door would be replaced by one that drank screws like meat. Arya took her mics down with hands that had remembered their work in the night, and found she couldn't unhear the politeness of those knocks, the way danger had asked permission before it tried the handle. The week was not over, the calendar said, but the cabin felt finished, its quiet now crowded with what it had been willing to hold, and she wrote in her notebook a line she would not use on any project. "Do not mistake the absence of noise for safety, only for rehearsal." On the way out, she saw sock prints on the logging road, already fading under the new rain, and told herself that was a kind of mercy. The highway narrowed from 4 lanes to 2 just past mile 247, where floodlights from a bridge project ended, and the dark began again, like a door closing behind a person who thought they were alone. Nikhil had been driving since sunset, with coffee that tasted like pennies and a rental sedan, whose dashboard glow made the cabin feel like an aquarium, bright inside and black infinite outside. Rain stitched the windshield in tight diagonals, and the wipers laid down brief, deceptive clarity that vanished before his eyes could use it. The GPS blue line floated over a map that showed nothing but Blank County and a few gray roads that went nowhere. Then the screen blinked, rerouting as if the car had startled itself. He passed a car on the shoulder, with hazards going rhythmically slow, a metronome for nerves, and watched it shrink in the mirror until the red blink looked like a distant tower light. 5 miles later, it appeared again, ahead. Same model, same dented rear quarter, same slow, patient blink parked under a green sign that announced 247 inches numbers that reflected rain like wet eyes. The mind does inventory at night, he told himself, and it finds patterns because patterns make fear feel like math instead of weather. He eased off the gas a fraction and felt the car float, that lightness that means tires are thinking about water more than asphalt, then settled back into the lane as if nothing had thought at all. The radio had lost stations 30 minutes back and offered only an evangelist fading in and out like a ghost running a dimmer switch, and Nikhil turned it down to hear the road's own voice better. That was why the tapping was clear when it started. A sharp tick-tick from the rear passenger side that sounded exactly like a small rock caught in the tread, except it kept perfect time with the hazard blink of the car he had passed twice. He accelerated to test it, and the tick sped up obediently, then slowed when he did, which should have reassured him but didn't. At 247, again a senseless loop. He thought, except highways can loop people without moving the road. His tire pressure light chimed and went yellow. He took the next exit, a corkscrew down to a frontage road that ran between black fields and a single gas station that looked closed even though the canopy lights were on. The store window was a mirror that kept the inside to itself, and the air pump sat like a small robot under the canopy, screen fogged, card reader blinking a sullen green. Nikhil eased beside it and stepped out into rain that felt colder than it had any right to be in late summer. The kind of cold that lives in concrete and comes up through shoes. Rear passenger tire, soft but not flat. A slow sigh rather than a scream. Sidewall clean, tread pebbled with grit. One small silver head of a drywall screw winking between grooves like a bad coin. He fished the rental packet for the inflator kit, and remembered too late that the trunk space was a different geometry in this model, the latch hidden under a lip that made fingers feel clumsy. The station door opened then with a little chime that felt out of place in a place with no people, and a man in a hooded rain jacket stepped halfway out and raised one hand the way strangers do when they want to look helpful without committing to words. "Airs on the house," the man said, voice neutral, the accent from nowhere in particular, and ducked back inside as if warmth were a species that might escape. Nikhil swiped anyway out of habit, watched the blinking green go steady, and listened to the compressor wake with a tired growl. As air went in, the tick-tick synchronized again with something unseen, and he looked across the highway and saw a pair of hazard lights wink on in the far lot where trucks sometimes idle, as if a driver had returned and left again in the span of a breath. "Patch kit?" he asked through the prop door, not stepping over the threshold, and the man held up a hand like a stop sign and said, "Not tonight, friend. The roads are eating nails since the bridge work started." The sentence was ordinary and wrong at once, like a familiar melody played a half step off, and Nikhil took the inflator hose from the valve and capped it with fingers he had to tell to be gentle. The pressure light blinked off on the dash, then on again, yellow to red this time, and the tires settled visibly, the rubber seeming to relax into the idea of surrender. "Spare?" the man asked, still half inside, and Nikhil nodded because there had to be one, because rental contracts implied as much, like a prayer. He popped the trunk and lifted the false floor, and there it was. A donut spare with a tiny admonition stamped on its face about distance and speed and secrets, next to a jack that looked new in the way tools look when no one has had to trust them. Rain made everything slippery, and he found himself bracing a knee against the bumper to steady the wrench on the lug, the night making balance a calculation rather than a reflex. Halfway through, another car rolled in under the canopy and idled with its lights off, windshield gleaming black, and stayed there like a thought someone didn't finish. The man in the doorway watched the new arrival over Nikhil's shoulder and said, "You're quick," which sounded like praise but sat in the gut like a warning. Nikhil got the donut on, lowered the car, and felt that odd moment when weight transfers in the sedan decided to be a different animal than the one that arrived. The other car's driver door cracked open an inch and closed again. Nobody getting out. Just that little release of interior light that proved a person existed in there somewhere. Nikhil slid behind the wheel and locked the doors, because that's what hands do when minds are busy pretending they aren't afraid. He pulled back onto the frontage road, taking the long loop to the on-ramp, and checked the mirror because empty glass behind is a kind of drug on nights like this. The other car rolled out 2 beats later and merged behind with its lights still off. A shadow practicing being a car, or a car practicing being a shadow, and kept a distance that could be called courteous if the night were kinder. On the ramp, he accelerated, until the donut began to hum the way donuts do at speeds they hate, and he backed off to keep it from singing too loud. The car behind let the gap grow, then draw back in, a tide without moon, and Nikhil set the cruise not because it helped, but because it made his feet feel less responsible for outcomes. At mile 247, again impossible, he told himself. But the sign didn't care. Someone had dragged an orange construction barrel into the right lane and laid it on its side, a bright, wet obstacle that looked like a toy until the last second. He swerved left, the donut complaining, and saw in the mirror that the car behind picked the barrel up mid-roll with its front end and rode it a few yards like a lion does a kill before letting it go. The barrel bounced into the median and settled. The other car's lights came on finally, low beams that made the road look honest again for a heartbeat. Then they clicked off, and the car drifted back to that courteous distance that was not a kindness. The next exit sign didn't say a town, only a number, and the word service. And he took it because a word like that means different things in daylight, and he needed the daylight meaning. The ramp spit him onto a short loop that ended in a cluster of buildings with metal shutters, and one lit window that revealed a vending machine, and a bulletin board with flyers whose corners curled like old leaves. He parked under the single working light and watched the mirror fill with nothing for a count of 30 that felt like 30 rehearsals for panic, then another 30 for performance. The other car never appeared, and the night suddenly felt as empty as it had been pretending not to be. In the vending machine's reflection, he saw the rental's rear seat and the thing he had not let himself look at before. A dark smear on the passenger side headrest, where his hair had not touched, and a tiny crescent of glass on the floor mat that didn't come from his day. He checked the rear door and found the child lock engaged on a car with no children, and the driver's side rear seatbelt was pulled all the way out and locked, as if it had been pinned across a body that didn't want to sit still. The rental agreement in the glove box had a return noted from a town 2 counties over with a date from 2 days ago, and the pen impression beneath it made a name that had been pressed too hard and then scribbled out. Behind the bulletin board glass, a sheet with a sheriff's badge asked for information about a white sedan used in roadside incidents along the construction corridor, last seen near a station at the 247 exit. He stood there and let the rain decide how wet he should be, and listened for an engine that did not come, then thumbed the number on the flyer and read the plate aloud from his trunk, as if speaking the characters could make them less his. The dispatcher told him to stay under the light and wait for a unit to roll by. And he stayed because suddenly the donut's warning felt like wisdom rather than nuisance. When the cruiser arrived, its light bar off like a courtesy, the deputy looked at the rental, then the smear on the headrest, then the way Nikhil held his shoulders like a person bracing for a wave. "Good to stop," the deputy said softly, as if loud would break something, and turned his shoulder to the wind so the radio could hear better when it asked for the 5th time whether anyone was in the car with him. The highway kept going, as highways do, pretending not to remember what they see, and behind them somewhere, as the barrel lay on its side, like a bright punctuation mark, at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read again. Nikhil watched the cruiser in the mirror on the ride back to the station, and decided that sometimes the scariest thing isn't being followed, but finally pulling into a pool of light and learning what has been in the car the entire time.